guys, today I would like to explain the single system of law again. So I normally ask you to discuss the validity of a piece of legislation or proposed legislation or even a common law principle by referring to the single system of law. Alright, so what is the single system of law? The single system of law since 1994 in this country is the Constitution. And the Constitution is the highest law in this country. The Constitution is the law that regulates everything, that binds everyone, from all the sources of law, the citizens, the parliament, and even the president. So the single system of law is the one system in this country, one system of law, the rule of law in this country, the supreme law or the highest law that governs everything in this country is the Constitution. And you will also know that we often refer to South Africa as a constitutional state. Why is that? Because in the constitutional state of South Africa, we work according to a single system of law, which is the Constitution. The Constitution, in other words, is the supreme law. And this supreme law, we have said, binds everyone and everything, including all the sources of law. And can you remember what are the sources of law? The sources of law that you know is, of course, the common law, the customary law, the case law, and the legislation. So when we look at those sources of law, we see that they need to be constitutional, because remember we said the Constitution binds everything and everybody in this country, and therefore including the other sources of law, the case law, the legislation, the common law, and the customary law. So when we say these sources of law are under constitutional control, it means that the Constitution controls how we are going to use these sources of law. How are we going to use a particular piece of legislation or a particular common law principle? And these sources of law will only be valid if they are in line with the one system of law, which is the Constitution. Alright, so we have said the single system of law, in other words, is the Constitution, and the Constitution is the highest law or the supreme law of the country, and all other sources of law, and remember, sources of law, case law, the legislation, the customary law, the common law, all these sources needs to be constitutional, and therefore we say they are under constitutional control, because the Constitution prescribes how we use these sources and how we interpret these sources, and they need the validity from the Constitution. In other words, they will only be valid if they are in line with the Constitution, or if they are constitutional. Alright, so when will these sources, or when will anything in this country be constitutional or valid? And here we go to section 39(2) of the Bill of Rights, which tells us legislation or common law will be valid or constitutional when it promotes the purpose, the object, and the spirit of the Bill of Rights. And let's quickly remind ourselves, what is the spirit? What is the object? What is the purpose of the Bill of Rights? Can you remember some of the rights that we find in the Bill of Rights? Section 9, the Equality Clause. Section 11, the right to life, the right to dignity, the right to freedom of religion and culture. So what is the purpose, the object, and the spirit of the Bill of Rights? It's to promote the fundamental rights like life, like equality, like freedom of religion. So let's use that example of the Criminal Procedure Act that I referred to in your test. Remember the Criminal Procedure Act of 1977 that still allowed for the death penalty as punishment for certain crimes. So I asked you, is this piece of legislation, this piece that allows for the death penalty, is that valid and refer to the single system of law? Then what do we say? We say the single system of law is the Constitution, and the Constitution is the supreme law of the country, and therefore all sources of law, including legislation, including the CPA that still allows for the death penalty, this legislation, this piece of legislation allowing for the death penalty is under constitutional control. So the Constitution will control how we interpret and use this legislation, and the Constitution will say whether this piece of legislation is valid or not. And then we ask, so when will it be valid? And remember, then we refer to Section 39(2) of the Bill of Rights, which says it must promote the spirit, the purpose, and the object of the Bill of Rights. So does the death penalty promote the spirit, the purpose, and the object of the Bill of Rights? So in other words, does the death penalty promote fundamental rights like the right to dignity, the right to life, the right to freedom and equality? And most of you told me, no, it does not, because there's an infringement now of some of the fundamental rights guaranteed to us in the Bill of Rights. So what can we do? If there is a problem with the validity of a piece of legislation, if that piece of legislation does not promote the fundamental rights in Section 39 in the Bill of Rights, it does not promote the right to life, to dignity, to equality, to freedom of religion, what can be done about it then? Then we see there are two options. The first one is we can develop it, or we can change or amend the legislation. Or if that is impossible, we will have to abolish this. If there's no other way to bring this piece of legislation in line with the Bill of Rights, with the fundamental rights, if there's no other way to bring this piece of legislation in line with the Constitution, to make it valid or to make it constitutional, then we need to abolish that piece of legislation, as was the case with the death penalty. The court said it does not promote the Bill of Rights. It does not promote the right to freedom, to equality, and the right to life, most importantly. And therefore, there's no way that we can interpret the death penalty to mean something else. The only option for us left is to abolish this piece of legislation. Why? Because it is not in line with the Constitution. It is not constitutional, and if it's not constitutional, in other words, it is not valid.